I personally think this is one of the interesting ones. So first thing, let's learn about some important things about the urinary bladder and the urethra. So first, their gross anatomy. The urinary bladder is a hollow muscular viscus, and we know that it's a temporary reservoir for urine. So the main body of an empty urinary bladder is pyramidal, having an apex and a base, and the lowest part of the bladder is called as neck, which further continues down as the urethra. Then interior of the bladder. So in an empty urinary bladder, greater part of the mucosa, it shows irregular folds due to its loose attachment to the muscular coat. Okay, and the interior of base, which is actually the posterior surface of the bladder, it presents a triangular area, which is known as trigone. And here the mucosa is smooth because of its firm attachment. So let's have a look. So here, now let's look at the gross features that we talked about. So this is the bladder. It's a hollow muscular organ, right? And if you see the main body, when it is empty, it's actually pyramidal shaped, okay, having an apex, okay, and here is the base, a superior and two inferior lateral surfaces, okay. Now this lowest part of the bladder is the neck, which is actually the most fixed part of the bladder, okay. And this neck here, see, here are your ureteric orifices. So the neck continues further down as the posterior urethra, okay. Now coming to the interior, as I said, so just have a look at this mucosa here. So a huge part of the mucosa, it shows irregular folds. Why are these folds irregular? Because they are actually loosely attached to the muscular coat, okay. And the interior of the base, which is actually the posterior surface here, this presents a triangular area. This is the trigone. And here the mucosa is smooth, unlike this part. Why? Because simply it is firmly attached. Okay. And then you have the internal urethral orifice. Okay. So the internal urethral orifice is located at the apex of the trigone. Okay. This is the apex. And then the ureters, they open into the bladder. Okay. The ureters open into the bladder at superior angles of the trigone. Here you have the urethra, and here you have the ureters opening at superior angle to the trigone. And the ureters, they actually pierce the bladder wall obliquely. Okay. Why so? Because by being oblique, they provide a valve-like action. Okay, and that valve-like action actually prevents a reverse flow of urine towards the kidney as the bladder fills up. So this is about the external features and interior of the bladder. Yes, so this is what I just showed you. And now let's talk about the ureter. So yeah, so ureter we have done. Now the structure and the wall. The wall of urinary bladder, it actually consists of three layers. So there's an outer serous layer, there's a thick coat of smooth muscle, and there's an inner mucous membrane. Now remember, the mucous membrane is lined by transitional epithelium. Now some characteristic features, okay, of the wall of bladder. So it stretches when the bladder distends. It forms a complete barrier to the passage of fluid and electrolytes, right? So that the urine stored in the bladder remains unchanged in the chemical composition. Okay? And the muscle layer is actually formed by smooth muscle fibers. And they constitute the detrusor muscle. This is the main muscle of the urinary bladder. And it's actually the contraction of the detrusor muscle that is responsible for emptying of the urinary bladder. Now let's talk about the urethra and its sphincters. So in males, the urethra is 20 centimeters in length and divided into three parts. So you have the prostatic urethra, which is 3 centimeters, the membranous urethra, which is 1.25 centimeters, the penile urethra, which is 15.75 centimeters. And the membranous urethra is surrounded by the external sphincter. In case of females, the urethra is 3.8 centimeters long. Then it extends from neck of the bladder to external meatus, and it transverses external sphincter and lies immediately in front of the vagina. Now let's talk about the sphincters of the urethra. So the circular smooth muscle fibers in the area of the neck of the bladder, they're actually thickened to form the internal sphincter, which we also call as sphincter vesicae. And the natural tone of the internal sphincter, it prevents the emptying of the bladder until the pressure in the body of bladder rises above a threshold level. Okay. Then you have an external sphincter. So beyond the bladder neck, as the urethra passes through the urogenital diaphragm, it is encircled by a ring of voluntary, which is a skeletal type muscle known as external sphincter of the bladder. The external sphincter provides voluntary control over micturition. Okay, and in males, the external sphincter is actually, it has a stronger action and it can stop micturition midstream even after it has been reflexly initiated. So that's one difference. Then let's talk about the innervation of the urinary bladder. This is important. You must know the innervation, both motor and sensory, and you must know how to make this diagram to support that. So the motor innervation, it consists of parasympathetic innervation, sympathetic innervation, and somatic innervation. So let's talk about the parasympathetic innervation. This is your motor innervation. So here, the efferent fibers, in case of parasympathetic innervation, that means it's also called as the nervi urgentis. Okay, they are derived from second, third, and fourth sacral segments, mainly S2 and S3. And now these carry the motor impulses to the bladder, causing contraction of the detrusor muscle and emptying of the bladder. Okay. Now in this diagram, it's actually given very small here, but that's a plus sign here, which means that they are stimulatory to the detrusor muscle, causing their contraction and therefore emptying of the bladder. Okay. And the same fibers are inhibitory. So there's a minus sign here. They are inhibitory to the internal sphincter here. This is where you have the internal sphincter. The sphincter vesicae, which we just talked about a short while back. All right, I hope the parasympathetic innervation is clear. So from here, S2, S3, S4, stimulatory to the detrusor muscle, causing contraction of detrusor muscle and hence emptying of the bladder, and same are inhibitory to the internal sphincter. All right. Then we have the sympathetic innervation. So this arises here in T11 to L2 segment. Okay. And now let's see, these are actually inhibitory to the detrusor muscle. So there's a minus sign here, and they are motor to the, that means they are stimulatory to the sphincter vesicae here, the internal sphincter. Okay, so they are actually opposite, exactly opposite to the parasympathetic motor supply. But I want to emphasize on the fact that the sympathetic innervation is actually not involved in micturition. Remember that. Okay, the only main role of sympathetic motor innervation is to prevent the ejaculatory material from getting discharged up into the urinary bladder. Okay, and to help prevent the reflux of sperms from the prostatic urethra into the bladder. Okay, is that clear? So the sympathetic innervation is not actually involved in micturition, but its only main role is to prevent the discharge from the ejaculatory discharge from going back into the bladder, and so to prevent the reflux of sperms from the prostatic urethra onto the bladder. Third motor innervation is the somatic motor innervation. Okay, so your somatic pudendal nerve, okay, also which arises from, now in this case, S2, S3, S4. This actually supplies the external sphincter here. Okay, and we know that the external sphincter is voluntary. All right, I hope the motor innervation is clear. Now let's go on to the sensory innervation. Okay, so now the afferents from the detrusor muscle here, they travel to the spinal cord via the pelvic splanchnic nerve, or what we also call as nervi urgentis, which we just spoke about in the parasympathetic motor innervation. So from the neck and trigone, the afferents travel via hypogastric plexus to the spinal cord, and then up to the segments T11, 12. Okay, so your pelvic splanchnic nerve, or the nervi urgentis, is actually communicating the sensation of bladder distension. Okay, and ultimately going to the T11, T12 into the spinal cord. Okay, and then what happens in the spinal cord further? So now the fibers of awareness of the bladder distension, they further run up in the posterior column, or what you call as the fasciculus gracilis, to reach spinal pontine and suprapontine micturition centers, the higher centers. Okay, then sensation of bladder pain. So your pain fibers are stimulated by, if in case the bladder gets way too distended before getting emptied, then the pain fibers get stimulated. Okay, or either by spasm of the bladder wall. This could be also because of a stone present there, or inflammation, or a malignant disease irritating the bladder. All these can stimulate the pain fibers. And now these fibers, they run predominantly in the hypogastric plexus, but are also present in the nervi urgentis. So same here itself, nervi urgentis. Okay, and then the once they are in the spinal cord, the fibers carrying pain sensation run in lateral spinothalamic tract. So our sensation of bladder distension was going up further in posterior column, but the pain fiber sensation will travel to higher centers through the lateral spinothalamic tract. Then urethral sensations. So they include the sensation of imminent voiding associated with maximal bladder filling. Okay, again they reach the spinal cord via the pudendal, or in this case they reach via the pudendal nerve here. So this is your pudendal nerve. So basically most of your sensations are being carried up through either your nervi urgentis or your pudendal nerves. All right. Then they travel through the hypogastric plexus and further up to the higher centers, which are different for each sensation. So in spinal cord, the fibers carrying urethral sensations travel in dorsal column. So I hope the sensory innervation is clear. So now moving on to the physiology of micturition, again, very important. So micturition is actually a process by which the urinary bladder empties itself when it is filled completely. Okay, and micturition begins in the 5th month of actually intrauterine life with the onset of urinary secretion, and it remains purely a reflex act until approximately 2 to 2.5 years of age, at which time it begins to come under voluntary control. And the main physiological events in the process of micturition are: one, the filling of the bladder, and secondly, the emptying of the bladder. So let's first talk about the filling of the bladder. So the transport of urine into the bladder we know occurs through the ureters. So now as the urine it collects in the renal pelvis, the pressure in the pelvis increases and initiates a peristaltic contraction beginning in the pelvis and spreading along the ureter to force urine towards the bladder. Now this peristaltic wave, it travels at a velocity of about 3 centimeters per second. Okay, from once every second to once every 2 to 3 minutes. And the peristaltic wave can move urine against an obstruction with a pressure as high as 25 to 50 mm of Hg. Okay, now let's talk about the capacity of the bladder. So the physiological capacity, it varies with age, being 20 to 50 ml at birth, about 200 ml at 1 year, and can be as high as 600 ml in young adult males. And in all these capacities, all these cases, the physiological capacity is about actually twice that at which the first desire to void is felt. Then there is something called as anatomical capacity also, which is basically the capacity of the bladder beyond which rupture occurs. And that is about 1 liter or more. Okay, and that's usually never approached during physiological conditions. Now about volume and pressure changes in the bladder during filling. So the normal bladder is completely empty at the end of micturition, and the intravesical pressure is equal to the intra-abdominal pressure. Now as the bladder gets filled up, it basically adjusts its tone, and a fairly large volume of urine can be accommodated with minimal alterations in the intravesical pressure. And how is this possible? This is possible because of the phenomena of adaptation. Okay, this is an important term that you all should know. And why does this adaptation occur? Because of the inherent property of plasticity. Okay, so one is because of plasticity, then the smooth muscles of detrusor, and because of the law of Laplace. These three factors are responsible for the phenomena of adaptation. Okay, do you all remember what is the Laplace law? So just to remind you, according to the Laplace law, pressure in a hollow organ is inversely proportional to its radius, the tone remaining constant. What does that mean? That if the tone is constant, the increase in radius decreases the pressure and vice versa. So if you remember the Laplace law, it states that P is equal to T upon R, where P is pressure, T is tension, and R is radius. So how do we apply this law to the bladder? So in the bladder, as the volume of fluid rises, the radius will increase, right? Due to relaxation of the detrusor muscle. And so the pressure rises almost nil. Okay? So the important thing is that the adaptation process is actually independent of the nervous mechanism. And so it is present even in the denervated bladder, but not after birth. Now, the third important topic in this unit is cystometry. Okay, and you often get a question on cystometry. So cystometry refers to the process of studying the relationship between the intravesical volume and pressure. And a cystometrogram refers to graphical record of this relationship. Okay, what you see on the right is the cystometrogram. So now, how do we record the cystometrogram? So basically, a double lumen catheter is introduced into the bladder, and the fluid is introduced through one lumen, and the pressure changes are recorded by connecting the other lumen to the pressure transducer of a polygraph. Then the bladder is filled with 50 ml increments of water, and at each volume, the intravesicular pressure is recorded. So now here what you see is a normal cystogram which shows three phases of filling. So first is your phase 1A. Okay, here. This shows, so this is the initial phase of filling, okay, in which the pressure rises from 0. So this is your intravesicular pressure, this is your volume. So the pressure rises from 0 to about 10 centimeters of water, okay. And that means that roughly around there is 50 ml of fluid collected in the bladders. See here the volume is given 50 ml. Okay, so this is your phase 1A. Then phase 1B, this one. Okay, this is a plateau phase, all right, which lasts till the bladder volume is roughly around 400 ml. Okay, so till here, this entire plateau phase is your 1B. Okay, and what happens during this phase, that the pressure in the bladder doesn't change much. So if you see, that's why it's at a plateau, because the pressure has continued to remain approximately at 10 centimeters water, which it attained even during the 1A phase. And why is this so? I just told you, because of the process of adaptation. Okay, that's why this pressure is consistent here. Now let's see what happens in phase 2. So the phase 2, it starts beyond the 400 ml volume. Okay, and this is where if you notice, the pressure begins to rise markedly. So look at the acute arise in pressure here. Okay, and this acute arise, okay, it triggers the micturition reflex. Okay, normally the voiding contraction, it raises the intravesicular pressure to just about 20 to 40 centimeters of water. Okay, so let's say normally around 20 to 40 centimeters, the normal voiding contraction. Okay, now when the pressure is intravesicular pressure is increased from 20 to 40 by the normal voiding contraction, and now if at this stage voiding is not avoided or not initiated for some reason, the pressure, it rises, okay, from 10 it rises to it can go even up till 60 or 80 centimeter of water. Okay. And then beyond, 600 ml, the urge of voiding becomes actually unbearable. Okay. So here, see, here already there is a sense of fullness that starts happening. Okay. When it is arising around 20 to 40. And then if it arises further, there is reflex micturition, and if the volume goes beyond 600, the urge to void becomes unbearable. So these are your 3 phases of a cystometrogram. You should know how to state these phases and be able to make this diagram. And also important to mention the phenomena of adaptation being responsible for this plateau. Okay. So we just talked about this phase 2 also. Now let's come to emptying of bladder. This was about the filling of the bladder. So emptying, obviously now we are talking about micturition. So micturition is a process by which the urinary bladder empties when it is filled. Emptying of the bladder is basically a reflex action, and it's controlled by the supraspinal centers and assisted by contraction of perineal and abdominal muscles. So basically, what does the emptying of bladder consist of? The micturition reflex, the voluntary control of micturition, and the role of perineal and abdominal muscles in micturition. So let's talk about the micturition reflex. Again, very important. So micturition reflex, as I said, is initiated by stimulation of the stretch receptors located in the wall of the bladder. Okay, so here in the wall, you have the stretch receptors, and they are the ones that initiate the micturition reflex. What is the stimulus for this initiation? So the bladder must be filled around at least 300 to 400 ml of urine in adults, and that is adequate stimulus for the reflex to occur. Even though under natural circumstances, the first urge to actually empty the bladder occurs at approximately 150 ml of the urine volume, but at that point, at that volume, one can easily suppress that urge. Then let's talk about afferents. So as I said, micturition reflex is a spinal reflex. Okay, so the afferents from the stretch receptors, okay, in the walls of the detrusor muscle and urethra, they travel along the pelvic splanchnic nerve. So these are your pelvic splanchnic nerves. And now the stimulus from the stretch receptors, they travel through the pelvic splanchnic nerves and enter the spinal cord through S2 to the dorsal roots to S2, S3 and S4 segments, okay, to reach the sacral micturition center. Okay, so you can see here in the diagram the stimulation from stretch receptors of the walls. They are traveling through the pelvic splanchnic nerves, okay, entering the spinal cord through the dorsal roots to S2, S3, S4 segments to reach the spinal sacral micturition center. Now this spinal sacral micturition center is formed by a sacral detrusor muscle nucleus and a sacral pudendal nucleus. So let me tell you a little bit about these. The sacral detrusor nucleus is a cluster of preganglionic parasympathetic neurons located in the interomediolateral gray matter of S2, S3 and S4 segments. Okay, and afferents of micturition reflex, they excite the neurons of this nucleus. Okay, and what about this? The sacral pudendal nucleus, it refers to a cluster of neurons found in the ventral horn. Okay. So this was in the dorsal horn. Sorry, the anteromediolateral, and this is in the ventral horn. Okay, primarily of the S2 and a less degree of S3 and S4. And the afferents of stretch receptors in the bladder wall inhibit this nucleus, thereby exciting the external sphincter of urethra. So you can see that here there are these minus signs showing the inhibitory effect, and here the stimulatory. Okay. So this was about the afferents. Now the efferents arising from these from this area. Okay, the sacral detrusor nucleus. They are the preganglionic parasympathetic fibers. Okay, which relay near the bladder or within the bladder and urethra. And these are the postganglionic parasympathetic fibers, which are, see, excitatory to the detrusor muscle and inhibitory to the internal sphincter. Okay, so here you saw the afferent supply going up to the spinal sacral micturition center, right, through the pelvic splanchnic nerves, and then the efferent supply came from the sacral detrusor nucleus. Okay, these are the preganglionic parasympathetic fibers. Okay, and they are stimulatory to the bladder, the detrusor muscle, and inhibitory to the internal sphincter. Okay, inhibitory to the internal sphincter. Now, what happens? What is the response to this entire process? So, once the micturition reflex is initiated, it is basically self-regenerative. That means the initial contraction of the bladder wall, it further activates the receptors to increase the sensory impulses. That means to increase the afferents from the bladder and urethra, which cause further increase in a reflex contraction of detrusor muscle of the bladder. So the cycle just basically keeps on repeating again and again until the bladder has reached a strong degree of contraction. And after a few seconds, the reflex, it fatigues itself and the regenerative cycle, it stops. Okay. So once a micturition reflex has occurred, but if it has not succeeded in emptying the bladder, the nervous elements of the reflex, they usually remain inhibited in an inhibited state for at least a few minutes to an hour before another micturition reflex occurs. Okay. And once the micturition reflex becomes powerful enough, this will cause another reflex which passes through pudendal nerves to external sphincter to cause its inhibition. So see here, see, through the pudendal nerve. So once the micturition reflexes become strong enough, it will cause another reflex. This will pass through the pudendal nerve to the external sphincter to cause its inhibition. Now, if this inhibition is more potent than the voluntary constrictor signals from brain, then urination will not happen, right? But if not so, if it's not more potent, then urination will occur unless the bladder will not occur, unless the bladder fills still more and micturition reflex becomes even more powerful. Okay. Now let's learn about the voluntary control of micturition. So, as I said, the micturition reflex is fundamentally a spinal reflex, which is facilitated and inhibited by higher brain centers, the supraspinal centers. And very similar to the process of defecation, it is subjected to voluntary facilitation and inhibition. So in infants and young children, micturition is purely a reflex action. Now, voluntary control is gradually acquired as a learned ability of the toilet training. And once the voluntary control is acquired, the supraspinal control exerts, the supraspinal control centers, they exert final control of micturition. Okay. And how do they do that? So the higher centers keep the micturition reflex partially inhibited all the time, except when it is desired to micturate. And even if the micturition reflex occurs, still the higher centers, they can actually prevent micturition by continual tonic contraction of the external urinary sphincter until a convenient time presents itself. Okay, and when that convenient time to urinate presents, the higher centers, they facilitate the sacral micturition center to initiate the micturition reflex and inhibit the external urinary sphincter so that urination can occur. Okay, and what are these centers? The supraspinal control centers which control the micturition reflex. They include the pontine micturition center and suprapontine micturition center. Okay, so your pontine micturition center, also called as the Barrington center, it corresponds to the locus coeruleus of the rostral pons, and the the neurons from this center descend in the reticulospinal tract and exert control over the sacral micturition center and thoracolumbar sympathetics. And this center is actually responsible for coordination of detrusor contraction and sphincter relaxation, and its other job is to relay inputs from the suprapontine centers. Okay, and the suprapontine centers which relay their influence on the sacral micturition center are the cerebral cortex, the basal ganglion, and the limbic system. And then, what is the role of perineal and abdominal muscles in micturition? So, certain muscle movements which aid the emptying of the bladder, but they are not essential components of the micturition process are: one, at the onset of micturition, the levator ani and perineal muscles are relaxed. Thereby, they shorten the post urethra and decrease the urethral resistance. Then the diaphragm descends and the abdominal muscles contract, accelerating the flow of urine by increasing the intra-abdominal pressure, which in turn secondarily increases the intravesical pressure and ultimately increasing the flow of urine. Now, some important points about the bladder that I want to tell you is that avoiding contraction once initiated is normally maintained until all the urine has been discharged from the bladder. And this function of facilitating impulses from higher center, this is a function of facilitating impulses from higher center. But if required, the micturition can be voluntarily stopped in between by inhibitory impulses from the higher center. Then also the bladder contracts in all directions like a toy balloon, okay, deflating from its neck. Then after urination, the female urethra empties by gravity, whereas the urine remaining in the urethra of male is expelled by several contractions of the bulbospongious muscle. Okay. And in a bladder dysfunction, the urinary bladder contractions are insufficient to completely empty the bladder. So some urine is often left in the bladder called as residual urine. Now, some abnormalities of control of nervous, abnormalities of micturition. Okay. So one is effect of interference with nervous control of the bladder. So one possibility is transaction of sympathetic supply. So what happens in this case? The immediate effect would be relaxation of ureteric reflexes, trigone and internal sphincter. If there is complete denervation, then ejaculation can no longer take place, though physical orgasm and erection can occur. So basically sterility takes place. Then later the internal sphincter may recover and close completely. though it gives way easily when a catheter is passed. And after initial and inconstant period of frequency of micturition, the bladder function is re-established in a comparatively normal way. Then second is effect of deafferentation of atonic bladder. So the destruction of sensory nerve fibers from the bladder to the spinal cord prevent transmission of stretch signals from bladder and therefore also prevent micturition reflex contractions. So what happens in this case? The person will lose all the bladder control despite intact efferent fibers from the cord to the bladder and despite intact neurogenic connections with the brain. And instead of emptying periodically, the bladder fills to capacity and overflows a few drops at a time through the urethra. And this is what we call as overflow dribbling. Then what are the causes of atonic bladder? Syphilis and crushing injuries to the spinal cord. So syphilis frequently causes constrictive fibrosis around the dorsal nerve root fibers where they enter the spinal cord and subsequently destroy these fibers. And crushing injuries can damage the sensory roots. Then effect of denervation. So when there is interruption with both afferent and efferent nerves, then certain other consequences are visible. So one, the bladder is flaccid and distended for a while. Then gradually the muscle of decentralized bladder becomes active with many contraction waves that expel dribbles of urine out of the urethra, and the bladder becomes shrunken and bladder wall hypertrophies. Okay. What is the reason for this? Okay, so the reason for a difference between a small hypertrophic bladder seen in this condition and a distended hypotonic bladder is seen only when afferent nerves are interrupted, and the exact reason is not known. The hyperactive stage in the former suggests the development of denervation hypersensitization, even though the neurons interrupted are preganglionic rather than postganglionic. And this condition usually happens in tumors of the cauda equina. Then we have effects of spinal cord transection. So this is important. What happens during spinal shock? There is the voluntary micturition is completely abolished. The activity of detrusor muscle remains in abeyance for a long period, but the sphincter now returns. The action of sphincter returns very soon. In this stage, the bladder responds to filling in the same manner as a dead organ or an elastic bag, and retention of urine is basically complete from an early stage. If no catheter is passed, the bladder will become increasingly overstretched. The sphincter is finally forced open by a high intravesicular pressure and small quantities of urine escape at frequent intervals, and that condition is called as retention with overflow. Then what else happens? The capacity is reduced and the walls become hypertrophied, and this type of bladder is sometimes called spastic neurogenic bladder. And owing to excessive stretching of the bladder wall, its nutrition also suffers and it becomes very prone to infections. And cystitis may occur. The death results usually from complications of a ascending UTI. And after the spinal shock has passed, the voiding reflex returns. Although there is no voluntary control, some paraplegic patients, they train themselves to initiate voiding by pinching or stroking their thighs, provoking what is called as a mild mass reflex. So that's all that is in this chapter. I would say the important questions, as I mentioned alongside, are you must know about the motor and sensory innervation of the bladder, okay, along with the diagram. This one, I think now you've seen it quite a few number of times, and I hope you have some idea of both the motor and sensory innervation. Then the physiology of micturition is very important, yes. Micturition reflex itself is quite important. Okay. And cystometrogram, very important question, along with the diagram, cystometry, basically, the phases. And I would say even these abnormalities, that what is, afferentation, what is denervation effect, and what happens in case of a spinal cord transection. Okay, so that finishes your renal physiology. Okay, and I hope I've been able to clarify most of the important topics in this unit. And as I said, I'll be happy to take any queries or doubts from you all, or you can forward them to Gauri. I'll just check with HOD sir. Just give me a couple of minutes to coordinate with him so that he can join in and take the session. Okay. Okay, so I just spoke to sir and he wants to know if you all are up for continuation of the session, or are you all too tired and you would like him to take this session next time. Can somebody please let me know? Gauri, are you there?